Hey everyone, welcome back to Love Wins, where the truth matters because it's the truth that sets us free. All right, we left off last week with Jesus being rejected in his hometown by his own people. Today, I want us to pause on a couple of verses. Some will automatically be turned off by this. Some will go, yes, 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 that's exactly what you should be telling us. I hope you both stick around because I think both camps have something to learn before this is over. Here's the first verse. This is Luke 4, verse 16. So he came to Nazareth, Jesus did, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. It was the custom of Jesus to go to the synagogue to worship on the Sabbath day. So last week we covered the rest of the story. They tried to kill him on a cliff outside of town. Verse 31 picks up after that and says, Then he came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and was teaching them on the Sabbaths, plural. So Jesus has this regular, habitual custom, Sabbath after Sabbath, to go to the synagogue and to worship. Now, it says what it says. If we are serious, you say, well, you're just telling people to go to church because you're a preacher. No. I have two little churches in this vast world. If you who are listening go to church or don't go to church, I will likely never know. This is not for my benefit. It's for your benefit. If you are serious about following Jesus, follow Jesus. Adopt the customs of Jesus. Do as Jesus did. Because let's think of it practically. If Jesus was here and you chose to be one of his disciples, and he said, yes, come and follow me, guess where you would be every Sabbath? You'd be with Jesus in the synagogue worshiping. Now, the problem that we get into with the Sabbath is twofold. It's actually one problem seen from two different perspectives. So one problem is that those who do go to the synagogue on the Sabbath can tend to feel self-righteous. I'm doing the right thing. Look at me. I'm going on the right day to the right place, just like Jesus did. The flip side of that is people saying, I'm not interested in buying my way to heaven. Jesus and heaven are not for sale. I don't need to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath, to church on Sabbath, on the right day or any other day to prove anything to anyone. You see the problem? Both attitudes, both perspectives are fixated on us and our performance or no need of performance instead of humbly following Jesus. In the book of Galatians, near the end, Paul talks about circumcision, which in the Jewish world is a huge deal. And he says at the end, after arguing that circumcision is not necessary, says that neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything. In other words, whether you get circumcised or don't get circumcised, it has no value. No value for what? And you could substitute out the word circumcision for any other religious practice. Neither the Sabbath keeping nor no Sabbath keeping avails anything. Nor paying tithe nor not paying tithe avails anything. And you can literally substitute in anything, because Paul's point is you cannot purchase what God is offering by doing or not doing anything. But in our humanness, you think, well, if it doesn't buy me anything, then it's not important. No. Nothing can be bought. That's the baseline of the gospel. Jesus is not for sale. Love is not for sale. Heaven is not for sale. There are a multitude of religions who will tell you that it's for sale, and many of those people reside inside my own denomination. But the truth is, it's not for sale. Nothing's for sale. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. Nothing is for sale. So if keeping the Sabbath isn't going to get me anything, why bother? Why would I sacrifice my time, my day, my this, my that, if it's not going to get me anything? Well, think about the questions you're asking. Me, my, what am I going to get or not get? You're still asking the same questions. You're still coming from that same perspective. So some people end up keeping the Sabbath to acquire something from God, and some people say, well, the Sabbath isn't going to buy me anything from God, so I'm just going to ditch it. But again, if you were literally following Jesus and he was literally here on earth like he was with Peter, James, and John, guess where you'd be on Sabbath? You'd be with Jesus in the synagogue. Now, why did Jesus do that? He wasn't buying anything. He wasn't acquiring anything. What was he doing? He certainly wasn't going there to have his ego inflated. They tried to kill him in his own hometown. So if you say, well, I don't go to church because sister so-and-so doesn't like me, or pastor so-and-so says this and does this, Jesus went to church with people trying to kill him, and the next Sabbath he went back again. Now, it was a different town. I'm not saying you need to stay in the same building. There are abusive churches that you maybe need to leave. But leaving an abusive church does not say that you need to ditch the Sabbath, because God gave the Sabbath. Jesus, it was his custom to keep the Sabbath. So the question is, why? There are so many conflicting arguments around the Sabbath, and they're all rooted in the same mentality of, well, does it get me anything or doesn't it get me anything? Let's dispense ourselves of that idea. It doesn't get you anything. But the fact that it doesn't get you anything doesn't mean it's not important. And I'm going to go another step further and tell you something wild that you might not understand or appreciate yet. The Sabbath isn't something you do for God. It's something God has given to you. It's for you. It's for you. Man was not made for the Sabbath, Jesus said. The Sabbath was made for man. It's one of God's gift to us. And so there are many people today who try and dismiss the Sabbath of the Bible and say, well, that's for the Jews. But what they're really trying to dismiss is the idea that I have to do that to get something. Well, dismiss yourself of that idea, because that's true. It's not going to get you anything. Not as far as salvation goes, or God's love for you isn't going to increase. You're not going to get more points. None of that stuff. So what's it for? Well, if you go back to Genesis, God created the Sabbath before there was a Jew. It's not for the Jews. It's for everybody. When God spoke from Sinai, now admittedly you can say that's for the Jews. I would argue it's not, because the people that came out of Egypt were both Israelites and Egyptians, and it was for all of them. He said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Holy just means set apart, different, distinct from. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it set apart from the other 6. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the Sabbath is the 7th day, is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor the stranger that is within your gates. Why? For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, and all that's in them. And on the 7th day he rested, because it was done. Now, I could spend hours unpacking the deep meaning in what I just rehearsed to you from what God wrote to Moses and the people at Sinai. And someday we'll probably do that, but not today. Fast forward to the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is like the New Testament equivalent of explaining what the Old Testament was about. It's like, okay, you did all these things in the Old Testament, now let me explain to you what that was really about. And when we get to the New Testament in Hebrews, it says, there remains therefore a rest for the people of God that they haven't yet entered into. So let me get practical. We were driving to church one day on the Sabbath, as was the custom of Jesus, and some discussion about how to keep the Sabbath came up. My dad is old school. He was raised old school. It's the way it is. And so he went on a bit of a rant about how people don't keep the Sabbath right anymore. And he tried to seal the deal by saying the Jews kept the Sabbath better than we do. And when he was done his rant, I said, hold on, Dad. Think about what you just said. Do we really want to be using the Jews, the people who killed Jesus, the people who habitually accused Jesus of not keeping the Sabbath right? Are they the people that we want to use as a model for what the Sabbath is about and how to keep it? To his credit, he got the message. And my dad, over the years, has been seeing more and more that heaven is not for sale and our behavior doesn't buy us anything. So then what is the Sabbath for? And what is this rest that still remains? The book of Hebrews is telling us that even though there have been staunch Sabbath keepers going way back, they never entered his rest. They never actually received what the Sabbath was meant to give. The Sabbath, like so many things God does for us, or gives to us, gets twisted around in our works performance-based mind into something that is the opposite of what it was meant to be. Again, the Sabbath doesn't buy you anything. It doesn't increase God's love for you. It doesn't earn you any points. So what is it for? Well, when God wrote it down for Moses, he said, the reason is because God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. So we find out there that the Sabbath is a celebration of the finished work of God at creation, that he is our creator, that he made everything well, and then he rested in what he had accomplished. Well, Moses smashed those tablets, if you remember the story. If you don't know the story, it's in Exodus 32, 33, 34. And then God calls him back up the mountain to get a second set. And there are some people who don't even realize there's a second set. And the irony for me is, if you have a version 2.0, it should be the primary version that you're using. It should not be the forgotten version. It's the updated one. No one's using Windows version 3 anymore, or 4 or 5. You use the latest version. It's so bad that my son was going to a Bible challenge, and it was asked by one of the adults where the 10 commandments are found. And he said, Deuteronomy 5. And they said, no. He said, yes. And they said, no, it's in Exodus 20. Yes, in Exodus 20 is the first time that God spoke from Sinai, what we call the 10 commandments. But there's a second version, because Moses smashed the first set. It's in Deuteronomy 5. And in Deuteronomy 5, the Sabbath is one of the ones that's been modified. And at the end, instead of saying, remember, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and rest on, that's not what it says. It says, remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt, and God rescued you. You say, well, what does that have to do with the Sabbath? Sabbath wasn't a major part in the Exodus story. In fact, they had to get reintroduced to the Sabbath after they left Egypt, because the Sabbath had, through slavery and time, had been basically left to the side. So why would God, in the second giving of the 10 commandments, give rescue from Egypt as the reason for keeping the Sabbath? Well, it's this simple. God didn't just make us. After we allowed Satan in and this world got completely messed up, God is also our rescuer. Jesus came here to rescue us. Jesus said, I didn't come here to condemn you. You're already condemned. I came here to save you. So the Sabbath is a weekly reminder. We have a Father who made us and did it well. But things got messed up. So he sent his Son to rescue us. If there are two things the world and the church have forgotten in this time, God created us. Big bang, big this, big that. No, God created us. And Jesus came to save us. And what he did is complete. It's enough. We can't add to it. We can't subtract from it. The Sabbath is a weekly celebration, a weekly reminder. Let me turn quickly to Hebrews. So I'll read it for what it says and not what I remember that it says, because my memory is not always as accurate as the text is. Hebrews 4, verse 9 and 10. There remains, therefore, a rest for the people of God. It's there. It's there for the taking, but we haven't taken it. Verse 10. For she who has entered his rest has himself or herself also ceased from his or her works as God did from his. Do you hear what that's saying? When God made the world, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, done. Day 7, rest. It's finished. It says those who enter his rest, they stop their work. It's finished. In other words, all of the striving in religion to get God to forgive us, to get God to accept us, to get ready for heaven, all of that nonsense would stop if we fully embrace what the Sabbath represents. It is finished. We can rest. It's why Jesus didn't stop going to the synagogue, because he knew why he was here. He was here on a rescue mission. He didn't expect people to receive him well because he knew we were alienated from God. He knew we were his enemy. He knew we were confused. He knew we were messed up. That's why he came. So our resistance of him, our attacks against him, us trying to trip him up and trick him, all of that stuff didn't bother him at the core of him. It didn't change what he was doing, because that's exactly why he was here. And he's given us this weekly reminder. Don't forget who made you. Don't forget who came to save you. And don't forget that you don't need to add to what he has done. You don't need to be tricked or fooled by the people who come with their fancy messages of it's Jesus plus a little bit of this, or Jesus plus a little bit of that, or Jesus plus this day, or Jesus plus this feast, or Jesus plus this rite. It's none of that. The Sabbath isn't an act of keeping the law to appease God. The Sabbath is a celebration of that everything's done. That's what it is. Do you know how joyful we would be every day of the week if we understood what the Sabbath is? Do you know how free we would be every day of the week if we understood and celebrated Sabbath for what it really fully means? As a Seventh-day Adventist, I can tell you right now that there are many, 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 many people inside my denomination who know when the Sabbath is, but they don't know what it is. And they're striving like the Jews to get it right. Do you know that there are Jews today, still today, who believe that if they keep one Sabbath perfectly, their Messiah will come? That somehow they can invoke through their own merit and their own behavior and their own worthiness, they can impact what God does or doesn't do to rescue them. What a burden to carry. And what a hopeless hope. Because it's not going to happen. We, as broken, flawed human beings, are incapable of perfect anything. We're not even capable of knowing what perfect is, because the perfect Son of God came to this world and the most religious people on it killed him because he wasn't good enough. That's how far from even knowing what perfect is we are. The Sabbath is a celebration that in spite of our brokenness, we have a Creator who made us, we have a Savior who rescued us, and we have actual legitimate hope. Because it's not on us and our performance. It's all been done. There remains, therefore, a rest for the people of God. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his own works, as God did from his. I want to be the best person I can be, because I want to be a blessing to the world. But I don't think for 1 second God's favor is impacted by how good or how bad I am today. Having my life become more like his is a blessing to me, and it's a blessing to the world. But it doesn't buy me anything, because heaven and love are not for sale. And when you truly understand who Jesus is and why he came, the Sabbath is a celebration. It is finished.